Training to failure is always a divisive topic in our fitness culture. Some people say it's really good, and if you want to build up your physique and build muscle, you should at least have some degree of failure in your training. And some people say it's bad, that increases the risk of injury, and it's not at all necessary if you want to build muscle, and it's something you should avoid outright. And a lot of the negativity surrounding it isn't so much if it's bad, it's just a misapplication of something that is good. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my top tips on how to best use muscular failure for the greatest impact while keeping you safer, more athletic, and the ability to program it so you can get as much out of it and avoid all that negative bad stuff. We're striving for as much of a muscular failure as possible. Because a lot of people will say, yes, I train to technical failure, where form starts to break down, you can't do the technique quite as well anymore. But a lot of the evidence-based research these days is strongly suggesting that if we want to create a good, strong stimulus for hypertrophy, we want to push the fatigue of the actual muscle cells themselves. And oftentimes, technical failure may fall well short of that. So a common example is the classic muscle up. And as anyone who's tried muscle ups knows, that the most limiting part of the muscle up is the transition between the pull up and the straight bar dip. So if you're taking your muscle ups to failure, you're probably getting to the point where you can no longer complete that transition. But if you just simply got out a few more reps, you could probably keep doing pull-ups and straight bar dips separately without the transition. You also want to be looking at exercises that have relatively low demand on mental focus and your cardio system and other things that are going on. So the less skill and proficiency you need to complete or continue doing an exercise, the easier it's going to be to push the actual muscle cells into a very high state of fatigue. Another thing to consider is if the exercises are relatively low consequence types of training. Any type of exercise that says you'd better be doing this well, or else if you mess up, you could hurt yourself, your nervous system and your subconscious is always going to have your health and your preservation as a top priority. So you're probably going to jettison from the set in the interest of self-preservation long before you can really push your muscles to a super high level of fatigue just to keep yourself safe. And the third characteristic we want are exercises that are easy to load the body up with a good amount of resistance, so that way we're just not doing endless repetitions and kind of making it an endurance exercise. So the types of exercises that are usually the best for driving you to a high state of muscular fatigue, aka failure, are usually, quote, boring exercises, basic push, pull, and squat movement patterns, nothing fancy, nothing requiring a lot of skill, and usually with tools that are fairly easy in and easy out. Weight machines are a classic example of this because you don't have to get weight up into position like with an inclined dumbbell bench press, and things that are really easy to start like a leg press and so on. It doesn't require nearly as much skill as, say, a front squat, but you can still load up the muscles with a very high degree of resistance. When it comes to free weights, I like just simple classic dumbbells. I've always found that's a little bit easier to work with compared to barbells. And bands are another good example because it's really hard to kind of overdo things on a band, and you can even adjust the resistance level a little bit depending on where you're standing on the anchor point. And of course, my classic go-to is classic basic bodyweight training, maybe a little bit of weighted calisthenics, along with overcoming isometrics. Single joint exercises are also a favorite for really pushing a muscle to a very high state of fatigue. They require very little relative skill. They require very little relative proficiency in order to protect yourself, so it's very comfortable to push the muscle very hard. And it's also a type of training that you can really put a lot of emphasis in one area, so you're not feeling like you're getting compromised by things like cardio or stability or proficiency or even the weakness of other muscles along the chain that may be holding that development of that muscle back. And finally, we're talking about programming, because it's a lot easier to push a muscle to muscular failure when we program it later on in the workout. If you set up with your dumbbells or you're doing your rows and pull-ups and trying to go to the failure right at the beginning of the workout, you're relatively fresh, so it's harder to push to that limit of the muscular cells themselves, with other things potentially getting in the way. But if you have things like your strength training, your skill training, and other types of proficiency-based exercise at the beginning of the workout, not only do you stand a better chance of improving your proficiency with relatively fresh muscles, but you're creating some degree of fatigue and burnout in the muscles from that training to begin with. Then when you go into your quote finisher phase, like in grind style calisthenics, and you're doing your bicep curls or your chest flies after you're doing your weighted dips or progressive push-ups, now the muscles are much easier to push to a high state of fatigue because they're already kind of burned out a little bit. But your proficiency is low, so you're using very simple exercises, and it's a lot easier to push the actual muscle cells to a very high level of that fatigue as opposed to earlier in the workout. And of course, there's a hell of a lot more to building muscle than just pushing the muscle to that high state of fatigue, because there's also genetics, diet, lifestyle, strength, proficiency, tension control, neuromuscular proficiency, and a whole host of other factors. So yeah, you can go to failure all the time and never build an ounce of muscle if these other factors are not also taken care of. And this video will show you exactly how I apply these strategies in my grind style calisthenics program. Full body workout right here. Check it out and let me know if you have questions below. Be fit, live free.